I stood in the shower of our Ballard townhouse, my hands shaking. Not from the cold water, from what I'd just felt under my fingertips. Hard, immovable, foreign. 2 weeks ago, I first noticed it, a lump the size of a pea. I brushed it off. Last week, it had grown to the size of a bean. I convinced myself it was hormonal. My period was due any day. Today, it felt like a walnut. I closed my eyes and tried to remember my last mammogram. 3 years ago? 4? I'd been 30, just had Harper, and my startup job was consuming every waking hour. Then came the product launch, then the promotion to director, then another launch. I opened my eyes and stared at my reflection in the fogged mirror. A successful 34-year-old woman, marketing director at a Series B tech company, mother to 8-year-old Harper, wife to Ryan. I had my life under control. In 3 hours, I was supposed to walk on stage at a downtown Seattle conference center and present the project I'd worked on for 6 months. 300 people in the audience, investors, press, cameras, my career-defining moment. I wiped the steam off the mirror and looked at myself again. Deep breath. I put on my white blouse, black blazer, red lipstick. Picked up my phone and opened my insurance app to find an in-network provider. I called the breast clinic at Swedish Medical Center. A cheerful receptionist answered, "Our next available appointment is in 2 weeks." I looked down at the lump visible through the thin fabric of my blouse. "I need to come in today," I said quietly. "It's urgent." I didn't know then that in 6 hours my entire world would collapse. That the words, triple-negative breast cancer, would destroy everything I'd built. That my body would become a battlefield. And I would become someone completely different. The receptionist squeezed me in at 2:30 that same afternoon. I canceled the presentation, sent an email to my VP with some vague excuse about a family emergency. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd worked 6 months on that pitch, and I threw it away with a single sentence. Swedish Medical Center's breast clinic occupied the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like antiseptic and fear. I sat in the waiting room surrounded by women who looked just like me. Professional clothes, wedding rings, phones clutched in white-knuckled hands. None of us made eye contact. The mammogram technician was kind. She positioned my breast on the cold plate and told me to hold my breath. The machine pressed down, flattening tissue that already hurt. 4 images. Then she left to show them to the radiologist. I stood there half naked in a paper gown, arms crossed over my chest, staring at a poster about self-exams that I'd ignored for years. She came back with a different expression. The radiologist wanted an ultrasound. Right now. The ultrasound room was darker. The technician squeezed warm gel on my breast and moved the wand in slow circles. I watched her face instead of the screen. Watched her pause. Zoom in. Measure something. Pause again. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She left again. This time she came back with a doctor. A woman in her 50s with gray streaks in her dark hair. She introduced herself as Dr. Chen, the breast radiologist. She didn't smile. She took the ultrasound wand and placed it exactly where the technician had paused. On the screen, I could see something dark and irregular, like a storm cloud with jagged edges. Dr. Chen explained that they needed a biopsy. Today? The mass was large enough and looked suspicious enough that waiting wasn't an option. I nodded like I understood, but I didn't understand anything. 2 hours ago, I'd been preparing to present to investors. Now I was lying on a table while a stranger inserted a needle into my breast. The biopsy hurt more than I expected. A sharp sting of local anesthetic, then pressure, then a clicking sound as the needle punched through tissue. 5 samples. Dr. Chen said the pathology results would take 3 to 5 business days. She gave me a card with a direct number. Her eyes were gentle but honest. She'd seen this before. She knew what it probably was. I drove home in a daze. Harper was at Ryan's mother's house for dinner. Ryan was still at work. I sat in our empty townhouse and Googled everything I shouldn't have. Breast lumps, irregular masses, biopsy results, triple negative, 5-year survival rates. The statistics swam in front of my eyes. 87%, 73%, 62%. It depended on stage, on grade, on factors I didn't understand. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I went through the motions, answered emails, made breakfast for Harper, kissed Ryan goodnight. But inside, I was frozen, waiting. Every time my phone rang, my stomach dropped. The call came on Friday afternoon during a Zoom meeting. I saw Swedish Medical Center on the caller ID, and my entire body went cold. I muted myself and answered. Dr. Chen's voice was steady, professional, compassionate. Invasive ductal carcinoma, estrogen receptor negative, progesterone receptor negative, HER2 negative, triple negative breast cancer. She was referring me to an oncologist. The appointment was already scheduled for Monday morning. I don't remember what I said. I think I thanked her. I hung up and stared at my laptop screen. My colleagues were still talking about Q4 marketing strategy. Their mouths were moving, but I couldn't hear the words. I closed the laptop. Cancer. I had cancer. That night, Ryan was asleep by 10. I was still awake at 2 in the morning, laptop open on the kitchen table, diving deeper into the nightmare. Triple negative breast cancer was the most aggressive type. No hormone receptors meant fewer treatment options. It grew faster, spread faster. The survival statistics were worse than the ones I'd seen before. I read stories on cancer forums. Women who'd gone through chemo and lost everything. Their hair, their energy, their jobs, their sense of self. Women who'd had mastectomies and looked at their bodies in the mirror and didn't recognize what they saw. Women who'd survived. Women who hadn't. The screen blurred. I realized I was crying. Silent, choking sobs that I muffled with my fist because I didn't want to wake Ryan. Didn't want to explain. Didn't want to say it out loud because saying it would make it real. I had cancer. And in 4 days, I would learn how bad it really was. Seattle Cancer Care Alliance sat on Eastlake Avenue, a modern glass building that felt more like a corporate office than a hospital. I'd driven past it 100 times on my way to work and never imagined I'd be walking through its doors as a patient. The oncology waiting room was quiet. Too quiet. People sat with family members, leafing through magazines they weren't really reading. I sat alone. Ryan had a critical meeting at work. Or maybe he just couldn't face this. I wasn't sure which hurt more. My oncologist was Dr. Patricia Morrison, a woman in her early 50s with short silver hair and reading glasses on a chain. She shook my hand firmly and led me into her office. The walls were covered with diplomas and certificates, but also photos of smiling patients, survivors, I assumed. I wondered if I'd be one of them. Dr. Morrison pulled up my scans on a large monitor. There it was, my tumor, 3.2 centimeters, larger than I'd imagined. She pointed to small spots in my lymph nodes. The cancer had already spread. Stage 2B, triple negative breast cancer. She explained the treatment plan in a calm, methodical voice. Neoadjuvant chemotherapy first. That meant chemo before surgery. 6 cycles over 4 months. The goal was to shrink the tumor and kill any microscopic cancer cells that might have traveled elsewhere in my body. Then surgery. A mastectomy. Possibly bilateral, removing both breasts, given my high risk. Then radiation therapy. I interrupted her. My voice sounded small and desperate even to my own ears. What if we did surgery first? Cut it out now, before it got worse. Dr. Morrison's expression softened but didn't change. She'd clearly heard this question before. She explained that with triple-negative breast cancer, surgery alone wasn't enough. The cancer was too aggressive. Even if they removed the tumor, microscopic cells could already be circulating in my bloodstream. Without chemotherapy, those cells would grow. Within months, the cancer would come back. This time in my lungs, my liver, my bones. Without treatment, she said quietly, we're looking at months, not years. The words hit me like a physical blow. Months. I was 34 years old and she was talking about months. I signed consent forms in a daze. Chemotherapy, port placement surgery, genetic testing, FMLA paperwork for work. My insurance company had already pre-approved the treatment plan. At least that was one less battle. But the out-of-pocket maximum was $8,000. Money I didn't have saved. Money I'd have to figure out somehow. Dr. Morrison ordered additional tests before we could start. A CT scan of my chest and abdomen to make sure the cancer hadn't spread further. An echocardiogram to check my heart function before the toxic drugs. Blood work. More blood work. My body was being mapped and measured and reduced to numbers on charts. The genetic testing results came back within a week. I had a BRCA1 mutation. A faulty gene I'd been carrying my entire life without knowing it. It explained the cancer. It also meant my risk for ovarian cancer was nearly 70%. After I finished treatment for breast cancer, Dr. Morrison recommended removing my ovaries too. Preventative surgery. Another piece of myself I'd have to sacrifice to stay alive. I sat in my car in the parking garage after that appointment and finally let myself cry. Not the silent tears I'd been holding back for weeks. Full, gasping sobs that shook my entire body. I was going to lose my breasts, my hair, my fertility, maybe my life. Everything I'd worked for, the career, the perfect image, the control, felt meaningless now. My body had betrayed me, and the only way to survive was to poison it, cut pieces away, and hope that was enough. I pulled out my phone and opened the FMLA forms. Typed an email to HR. Subject line, medical leave request. I stared at those words for a long time before I hit send. This was happening, and there was no way out but through. The day before my first infusion, I cut off all my hair. I didn't wait for it to fall out in clumps on my pillow or clog the shower drain. I needed to control something, anything, about what was happening to my body. So I stood in our bathroom with electric clippers and shaved my head down to the scalp. Harper watched from the doorway, eyes wide, saying nothing. When I was done, I looked like a stranger. Ryan came home and stared at me for a long moment. Then he went upstairs without a word. The infusion center at Seattle Cancer Care Alliance was on the 4th floor. Rows of recliners filled the space, each one occupied by someone fighting their own battle. Some looked sick, pale, thin, wearing scarves over bald heads. Others looked perfectly healthy, like they'd just come from brunch. I couldn't tell which group I belonged to yet. A nurse named Maria led me to a chair by the window. She was kind, efficient, the type of person who'd done this 1,000 times. She accessed my port, a device they'd surgically implanted under my collarbone a week earlier to make the infusions easier. I felt the needle slide into the chamber beneath my skin and tried not to think about the poison that was about to flow through it. The first bag was anti-nausea medication, clear liquid dripping slowly into my veins. Then came the red devil. That's what they called doxorubicin, the most powerful drug in my chemotherapy cocktail. It was literally red, bright as blood, and it earned its nickname. Maria hung the bag and warned me about the side effects: nausea, fatigue, mouth sores, and of course hair loss, though I'd already taken care of that. I watched the red liquid drip through the IV line, counting each drop like seconds ticking away. This was supposed to save my life. It looked like it could kill me. The infusion took 4 hours. Ryan didn't come. He'd said he had back-to-back meetings, couldn't get away. I sat alone and watched Netflix on my phone, trying to distract myself from the cold sensations spreading through my chest as the drugs entered my bloodstream. The first day wasn't so bad. I felt tired but functional. Drove myself home, picked up Harper from school, made dinner, though I couldn't eat much. Everything tasted like metal, a strange, persistent taste that coated my tongue and wouldn't go away no matter how much water I drank. The second day, the nausea hit. Not the kind where you throw up and feel better. A deep, constant nausea that made my entire body feel wrong. I lay on the couch while Harper watched TV, too weak to get up, too sick to sleep. The anti-nausea pills helped a little, but not enough. By day 3, I couldn't get out of bed. Every muscle in my body ached like I had the worst flu of my life. My bones hurt. My skin hurt. I couldn't lift Harper when she asked for a hug, and the look of confusion on her face broke something inside me. Ryan came home late that night. I heard him in the kitchen, opening the refrigerator, probably eating whatever leftovers he could find. He didn't come upstairs to check on me. We'd barely spoken since my diagnosis. He asked logistical questions. When was my next appointment? Did I need him to pick up prescriptions? But avoided anything deeper. He couldn't look at me when I was bald. Couldn't hold me when I cried. He was there physically but completely absent in every way that mattered. I understood, in some distant part of my mind, that he was scared. That he didn't know how to handle this. But I was scared too, and I was the one actually going through it. I needed him to be stronger than this. Instead, he was disappearing. The week after my first infusion, I noticed he was staying late at the office more often, working on weekends, taking calls in the other room. When he was home, he looked at me like I was something fragile that might break if he got too close. Or maybe he looked at me like I was already broken. I tried to talk to him once, in the dark of our bedroom when Harper was asleep. Asked him if he was okay. If we were okay. He said he was fine, just stressed about work. Then he rolled over and pretended to sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling the distance between us growing wider. I was losing my hair, my strength, my sense of self. And now I was losing him too. 3 weeks after my first infusion, my eyebrows and eyelashes started falling out. That was somehow worse than losing my hair. Without them, I didn't look sick. I looked alien, unrecognizable. I bought a wig and eyebrow pencils and learned how to draw on a face that looked vaguely human. Ryan barely noticed. The third cycle of AC hit harder than the first 2 combined. My body had no time to recover between treatments. Every 3 weeks, they pumped more poison into my veins before the last round had fully left my system. I was accumulating damage faster than I could heal. I didn't recognize the person in the mirror anymore. My head was completely bald now, smooth and pale like an egg. My eyebrows and eyelashes were gone, leaving my face strangely blank and featureless. The steroids they gave me to combat nausea had puffed out my cheeks and added weight around my middle, even as the rest of me wasted away. My skin had turned a grayish color, like old paper. Dark circles ringed my eyes no matter how much I slept. I looked sick. There was no hiding it anymore. No makeup or wig that could disguise what cancer and chemotherapy were doing to me. Work had become impossible. I'd tried logging in remotely after the second infusion, attending Zoom meetings from my couch, but I couldn't concentrate. The chemo brain was real. My thoughts moved through fog, words escaping me mid-sentence, simple tasks taking twice as long as they should. My team was understanding, my boss supportive, but I could see the reality in their careful emails. They were moving forward without me. Projects I'd started were being reassigned. My role was becoming optional. I was disappearing from my own life. Harper was afraid of me now. I saw it in the way she hovered in doorways instead of running to hug me. In the way she looked at my bald head and then quickly looked away. She was 8 years old, and her mother had turned into a stranger, someone who spent most days in bed, who couldn't play or cook or do any of the things mothers were supposed to do. One afternoon, she asked her grandmother why I looked like that. I heard the question from the next room, and it split me open. I couldn't blame her. I was asking myself the same thing. Who was this person inhabiting my body? Where had I gone? Ryan had stopped pretending to be present. He worked late every night, came home after Harper was asleep, left before she woke up. On weekends, he found reasons to be elsewhere. Errands that took hours, a friend's birthday, sudden urgent projects. When we were in the same room, he looked past me, through me, anywhere but at me. I was too exhausted to fight about it, too sick to demand answers. I just let him drift away, focusing all my energy on surviving each day. The infusion center had become my second home. Every 3 weeks, I settled into the same recliner by the window, watched Maria access my port, counted the drips of red poison. I knew the other regular patients by sight now, though we rarely spoke. Cancer was lonely, even in a room full of people fighting it. On my third infusion, a woman sat down in the chair next to mine. She was maybe 40, with short dark hair that was clearly her own. Not a wig, but real hair growing back in soft waves. She wore jeans and a sweater, makeup carefully applied. She looked healthy, normal, alive. She caught me staring and smiled. Introduced herself as Rachel. Said she was here for a follow-up treatment, part of a clinical trial. She'd finished her active chemotherapy 3 years ago. 3 years. The words hung in the air between us like a promise. I asked her, voice barely above a whisper, how she'd gotten through it. How she'd survived looking like I looked now, feeling like I felt now. How she'd found the strength to keep going when everything felt impossible. Rachel glanced at my bald head, my gray skin, the IV pole standing beside me like a sentinel. Her eyes were kind, knowing. She told me she'd been exactly where I was. Stage 3 triple-negative breast cancer. 8 rounds of chemo. Double mastectomy. Radiation. She'd lost everything. Her hair, her breasts, her marriage, her job. She'd been convinced she was going to die. But she didn't die. She made it through. And slowly, impossibly, life came back. Her hair grew. Her strength returned. She found a new job, new friends, a new version of herself that was different from before but maybe stronger. Not the same, she said carefully, but not worse. Just different. I felt something crack open in my chest, something that had been frozen since the day of my diagnosis. It wasn't quite hope. Hope felt too big, too fragile. But it was possibility. The faint outline of a future that extended beyond these infusion chairs and hospital rooms. Rachel wrote her number on a piece of paper and pressed it into my hand. Told me to call her if I needed to talk, if the darkness got too heavy, if I needed someone who understood. I clutched that paper like a lifeline. That night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't cry myself to sleep. I lay in bed, Ryan on the far edge, as distant as ever, and thought about Rachel's hair, the way it curled softly around her face. Proof that bodies could heal, that poison could leave and life could return. I wasn't sure I believed it yet, but maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. And if I survived, maybe I could figure out who I'd become on the other side. The 6th cycle was Taxol, a different kind of poison than the Red Devil. The side effects shifted. Less nausea, more nerve pain that made my fingers and toes tingle and burn. I was almost done with chemotherapy. 4 more months of hell, and I'd reached the finish line. Surgery was scheduled for 6 weeks after my final infusion. Dr. Morrison said the tumor had shrunk significantly. The treatment was working. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt numb, hollowed out. Like I'd survived by cutting away pieces of myself until there was nothing left but the will to keep breathing. Ryan had been gone more than he'd been home for the past 3 months. I'd stopped asking where he was or when he'd be back. Stopped waiting up for him. Stopped pretending we were still a couple instead of two strangers sharing a house and a daughter. One evening, I was lying on the couch when his phone buzzed on the coffee table. He was upstairs showering. The screen lit up with a text notification. I wasn't trying to snoop. I just glanced over reflexively, the way you do when something lights up in your peripheral vision. The message was from someone named Jessica. Just 3 words on the preview. Missing you tonight. My heart stopped. Then started again, beating too fast, too loud. I picked up his phone with shaking hands. No password. He'd never bothered with one. I opened the messages. The conversation stretched back months. Flirty texts at first, then increasingly intimate. Photos I didn't look at closely because I couldn't bear to. Plans to meet up. Expressions of frustration about his situation at home. About me. One message stood out, sent 3 weeks ago. I can't do this anymore. I need normal. I need you. Normal. He needed normal. And I was anything but. I scrolled further back, trying to pinpoint when it started. Late June. Right around my 3rd chemotherapy cycle. Right around the time I'd lost my eyebrows and started looking truly sick. He'd been building a parallel life while I was fighting for mine. Ryan came downstairs in sweatpants and a t-shirt, toweling his hair dry. He saw me holding his phone and went completely still. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just asked him if it was true. If there was someone else. If he'd been cheating on me while I was dying. He didn't deny it. Didn't apologize. He just sank into the chair across from me and put his head in his hands. Said he was sorry, but he couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't watch me deteriorate. Couldn't be the strong one. Couldn't pretend everything was going to be okay when he was terrified it wasn't. He said Jessica made him feel normal again. Like he wasn't drowning. Like his life wasn't falling apart. I asked him what he thought my life was doing. He didn't have an answer for that. He moved out 2 days later. Took enough clothes for a week and said he'd come back for the rest. I signed FMLA papers and divorce papers in the same week, both requiring my signature to officially end things. My marriage dissolved faster than my tumor had shrunk. Harper cried for 3 days straight. She was too young to understand why her father left, but old enough to know it had something to do with me. With my sickness. With the fact that I wasn't the mother I used to be. I wanted to fall apart. Wanted to scream and break things and rage at the unfairness of it all. But I couldn't afford to break down. I had surgery in 6 weeks. I had to stay focused, stay functional, stay alive. I called my sister Olivia in Portland at 2 a.m, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. Then she said 5 words that saved me. I'm coming. Pack Harper's lunch. 3 days later, Olivia showed up with 2 suitcases and a resignation letter she'd already submitted to her job. She was 29, single, with her whole life ahead of her, and she walked away from it all to move into my spare bedroom and help me survive. She took over everything I couldn't manage, cooking meals, driving Harper to school, sitting with me during infusions when the loneliness felt unbearable. She didn't try to fix me or tell me it would all be okay. She just showed up, day after day, and held the pieces of my life together when I no longer could. Ryan sent the divorce papers through a lawyer. I signed them in the hospital cafeteria between pre-op appointments. 10 years of marriage reduced to a stack of legal documents. But Olivia was there. Harper was there. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. I'd lost my husband, but I'd learned who actually loved me. And that knowledge, painful as it was, felt like a strange kind of freedom. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late October, 6 months after my diagnosis. 6 months of chemotherapy, of losing pieces of myself 1 cell at a time. Now I was going to lose the rest. I checked into UW Medical Center at 5 a.m. Olivia drove me while Harper stayed with a neighbor. The surgical wing was quiet, sterile, painted in calming blues that did nothing to calm me. I changed into a gown and waited in a pre-op bay while nurses started IVs and reviewed consent forms I'd already signed a dozen times. Bilateral mastectomy, removal of both breasts. The left because it had cancer. The right because I carried the BRCA1 mutation, and Dr. Morrison said it was only a matter of time before cancer appeared there too. Better to take them both now than wait for the inevitable. I understood the logic, but logic didn't make it easier to accept that I was about to wake up without breasts. Without the body I'd lived in for 34 years. The anesthesiologist introduced himself, asked routine questions, explained that he'd give me something to relax before they wheeled me into the OR. I barely heard him. My mind was stuck on a single thought. This was the last time I'd be whole. After today, I'd be carved up, hollowed out, reconstructed into something that only resembled a woman. The surgical team came in. Dr. Morrison, the plastic surgeon who would place temporary tissue expanders where my breasts used to be. Nurses whose names I immediately forgot. They marked my chest with purple surgical markers, drawing lines that mapped where they'd cut. I watched them draw on my skin like I was a diagram in a medical textbook. Then they wheeled me down fluorescent-lit hallways into the operating room. Bright lights, metal tables, machines beeping. Someone placed a mask over my face and told me to count backward from 10. I made it to 7. I woke up in stages. First came the pain, a deep, burning ache across my entire chest. Then the nausea from anesthesia. Then awareness of my body, heavy and wrong, weighted down by something I couldn't identify. I opened my eyes. Recovery room, bright lights, a nurse checking monitors beside my bed. Olivia in a chair against the wall, looking exhausted and relieved. I tried to lift my head to look down at my chest. The nurse gently stopped me. "Not yet," she said. "Give yourself time." But I needed to see. Needed to know what they'd done to me. When she finally helped me sit up slightly, I saw bandages. Thick white gauze wrapped around my entire torso. 2 plastic drains emerged from under the dressings. Tubes filled with blood and fluid that collected in bulbs pinned to my gown. The expanders beneath the bandages created strange, flat protrusions where my breasts had been. Not breasts, just geometric shapes under swollen, traumatized skin. I looked like I'd been in an accident, like something terrible had happened to me. And I guess it had. They kept me in the hospital for 2 nights. The pain was manageable with medication, but the wrongness of my body wasn't. I couldn't lift my arms above my waist, couldn't shower, couldn't sleep on my side. Every movement pulled at surgical sites and sent sharp reminders that I was no longer intact. The drains were the worst, constant reminders of trauma, needing to be emptied and measured multiple times a day. I had to record the output in a little notebook, track the color and consistency like some grotesque science experiment. On the 3rd day, Dr. Morrison came to check on me. She removed the bandages carefully, clinically, and I saw the incisions for the first time. Long, angry red lines across my chest where my breasts used to be. Stitches holding together skin that looked stretched too tight over the tissue expanders. I didn't look human. I looked mutilated. Dr. Morrison must have seen the expression on my face. She sat down beside the bed and said something I hadn't expected. The pathology report was back. They'd examined every bit of tissue they'd removed, every lymph node they'd tested, and they'd found nothing. 0 cancer cells. Complete pathologic response. The chemotherapy had worked better than anyone hoped. The cancer was gone. I should have felt relief, joy, something. But all I felt was numb. Yes, the cancer was gone, but so was everything else. My breasts, my marriage, my career, my sense of who I was. I was alive, but I wasn't sure anymore what that meant. Olivia took me home that afternoon, helped me into bed, arranged pillows so I could sit propped up without putting pressure on my chest. Harper peeked in, eyes wide and scared, and I tried to smile at her. Tried to be brave, but the truth was I felt broken in ways I didn't know how to fix. That night, alone in my room with the drains pinned to my shirt and pain radiating through my chest, I finally let myself cry. Not because of the cancer, because of what surviving it had cost me. Radiation therapy started 6 weeks after my mastectomy, once the incisions had healed enough to withstand daily treatments. 5 days a week for 6 weeks. 30 sessions total. I'd thought chemotherapy was the finish line, but cancer treatment kept extending, stretching out endlessly like some cruel marathon with no clear end. The radiation center was in a basement level of Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. I'd change into a gown, lie on a table under a massive machine, and hold perfectly still while invisible beams targeted the area where my breasts used to be. The treatment itself took only minutes, but the effects were cumulative. By week 2, my skin started turning pink. By week 3, it was angry red, burned like a bad sunburn. By week 4, parts of it were blistering and peeling. I couldn't wear a bra, not that I had breasts anymore anyway. The tissue expanders sat under damaged, radiation-burned skin that hurt to touch. I wore soft tank tops and slathered myself with prescription cream that barely helped. Every shower was agony. Every movement reminded me that my body was still a battleground. The exhaustion was different from chemotherapy exhaustion. Not the acute sickness, but a deep bone tiredness that accumulated day after day. I'd come home from radiation and sleep for 3 hours. Wake up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. But something shifted during those weeks. Maybe because I'd already survived so much. Maybe because the end was finally visible. Maybe because I'd lost everything I could lose and realized I was still breathing. I started noticing small things. Small victories that would have been meaningless 6 months ago but felt monumental now. One morning, I walked to the park 2 blocks from our house. Just walked there and sat on a bench for 10 minutes before walking home. My legs shook. I was out of breath. But I did it. I took a photo of myself on that bench and posted it to Instagram, an account I'd created but barely used. Wrote a caption, "Small win, made it to the park." 6 months ago, I was running 5Ks. Today, I walked 2 blocks and it felt like climbing a mountain. Progress isn't linear. A few days later, I ate an entire meal. Not picked at food or forced down a few bites, but actually tasted and enjoyed dinner. Olivia had made pasta, and for the first time in months, food didn't taste like metal or ashes. Another photo. Another caption. Small win. Ate a real meal, and it tasted like food. If you're in treatment and everything tastes wrong, I promise your taste buds will come back. Harper came home from school one afternoon and showed me a drawing she'd made. A picture of the 2 of us holding hands under a rainbow. She'd titled it, "My Brave Mom." I cried. Then I took a photo of the drawing and posted it with the caption, "Small win. My daughter is smiling again. So am I." The Instagram posts started getting responses. Other women going through treatment. Survivors who remembered those small victories. People I'd never met telling me I was helping them feel less alone. I hadn't meant to create a community. I'd just been documenting survival. But somehow it turned into something bigger than me. By week 5 of radiation, my skin was blistered and oozing, but I could walk 3 blocks. Could stay awake for full afternoons. Could laugh at Harper's silly jokes. On my last day of radiation, the technicians rang a bell mounted on the wall, a tradition for people finishing treatment. I stood there in my gown, skin burned and body exhausted, and rang that bell hard enough to echo down the hallways. Olivia cried. I didn't. I was too busy feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. It was over. Active treatment was finally over. The following week, I had a follow-up appointment with Dr. Morrison. She reviewed my scans, examined my healing incisions, and declared me Ned. No evidence of disease. But then she mentioned something else. A clinical trial. A new immunotherapy drug specifically for triple-negative breast cancer patients who'd achieved complete pathologic response. Early results showed it could reduce recurrence risk by 40%. The trial meant more drugs, more side effects, more time spent as a patient instead of a survivor. But 40%. 40% less chance of the cancer coming back. 40% better odds of watching Harper grow up. I asked Dr. Morrison how long I had to decide. She said 2 weeks. The trial was accepting patients through the end of the year. I went home and sat with the decision. Posted about it on Instagram. Small win, I finished treatment. Big question, do I keep fighting or start living? If you've done clinical trials, tell me your experience. The responses poured in. Stories of hope, of side effects, of regret and gratitude. No clear answer, just dozens of people who'd faced the same impossible choice. That night, I looked at Harper sleeping in her bed, her drawing of us taped to the wall above her pillow. Thought about Rachel from the infusion center, 3 years cancer-free. Thought about all the small wins that had carried me this far. I picked up my phone and emailed Dr. Morrison. I'm in. Sign me up for the trial. If fighting gave me better odds, I'd keep fighting. I'd already lost so much. I wasn't going to lose my future too. 6 months after my mastectomy, Dr. Morrison brought up the conversation I'd been avoiding. My ovaries. The BRCA1 mutation I carried meant I had a 70% lifetime risk of ovarian cancer. Maybe higher, given that I'd already had breast cancer. The recommendation was clear: prophylactic oophorectomy. Remove them before cancer had another chance to grow. I was 35 years old. The surgery would put me into immediate surgical menopause. Hot flashes, bone density loss, increased cardiovascular risk. All the symptoms of menopause compressed into an instant instead of a gradual transition. And no more children. Ever. Before cancer, Ryan and I had talked about having a second baby. Harper had been asking for a sibling since she was 5. I'd always imagined myself as a mother of 2, maybe 3. Cancer had stolen that future once already when I lost my fertility to chemotherapy. But there had been a slim possibility. My periods had come back a few months after treatment ended. My ovaries still worked, at least for now. Removing them would close that door permanently. Not just lock it, but tear it off the hinges and seal the opening with concrete. Dr. Morrison showed me the statistics. Women with BRCA1 mutations who had oophorectomy by age 35 reduced their ovarian cancer risk by 80%. Reduced their overall mortality risk by 77%. The surgery could save my life. But it would cost me the possibility of another child, another pregnancy, another chance at the motherhood I'd once imagined. I asked her what happened if I waited. If I held onto my ovaries for a few more years, just in case I changed my mind, or met someone new, or found a way to make peace with wanting another baby. She was honest. Every year I waited increased my risk. By age 40, my ovarian cancer risk would be 4%. By 50, over 14%. And ovarian cancer was a killer. Silent, aggressive, usually caught too late. If I developed it, I'd be back in treatment. Back in the infusion center. Maybe not as lucky this time. I left her office with a stack of pamphlets about surgical menopause and hormone replacement therapy. Went home and cried into Olivia's shoulder for an hour. This was supposed to be over. I was supposed to be done losing pieces of myself. But cancer kept taking more. Harper found me that night sitting on the back porch, staring at nothing. She climbed into my lap even though she was getting too big for it, wrapped her arms around my neck, and asked if I was sad. I told her the truth, that the doctors wanted me to have another surgery to keep me healthy, that it meant I couldn't have more babies, that I'd always wanted her to have a brother or sister. Harper was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that broke me open. Mom, I need you, not a sibling. I just need you to stay." She was 9 years old and she understood what I'd been struggling with for weeks. It wasn't about what I wanted or what I'd imagined my life would look like. It was about being here, being alive, being her mother for as long as possible. I scheduled the surgery for the following month, gave myself time to grieve what I was losing, but not enough time to talk myself out of it. Went through the pre-op appointments, the consent forms, the same sterile hospital routines I'd become too familiar with. The oophorectomy was laparoscopic, 3 small incisions instead of the major surgery of my mastectomy. I was in and out in a day. The physical recovery was easy compared to what I'd already been through. The emotional recovery was harder. Within days, the hot flashes started, sudden waves of heat that left me drenched in sweat at random moments. My mood swung wildly. I felt like I'd aged 20 years overnight. Dr. Morrison started me on hormone replacement therapy to help manage the symptoms, but it wasn't the same as having my own hormones, my own body functioning the way it was designed to. I grieved in stages. Grieved the second pregnancy I'd never have, the baby I'd never hold, the version of my family that existed only in my imagination. Grieved the easy, simple motherhood I'd taken for granted before cancer. Grieved my youth, my fertility, my sense of having control over my own body and future. But I also felt relief. The BRCA sword that had been hanging over my head was finally gone. I'd done everything I could to prevent cancer from coming back. I'd removed every piece of myself it could target. My breasts, my ovaries, sacrificed on the altar of survival. One evening, a few weeks after the surgery, Harper asked if I was okay. Really okay. I looked at her, 9 years old, growing up too fast, but still here. Still mine. I told her yes, because I was alive, because the cancer was gone, because I had her and Olivia and a future that still existed even if it looked nothing like what I'd planned. I'd lost so much, but I'd kept what mattered most. And maybe that was enough. The tissue expanders stayed in my chest for 4 months after the mastectomy, gradually being filled with saline every few weeks to stretch the skin. It was uncomfortable, sometimes painful, but necessary preparation for the final reconstruction. In March, almost a year after my diagnosis, I went back to UW Medical Center for the exchange surgery, removing the expanders and replacing them with permanent silicone implants. I'd chosen moderate-sized implants, nothing dramatic. I didn't want to look like someone else. I just wanted to look like me again, or at least some version of me. The surgery was easier than the mastectomy. I went home the same day, but the emotional adjustment was harder than I expected. These new breasts were symmetrical, perky, and completely numb. I couldn't feel anything when I touched them. They sat high on my chest like foreign objects placed there by someone who'd never met me. They looked like breasts in clothes, but they didn't feel like mine. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time that first week, trying to recognize myself. The scars were still visible, thin red lines across each breast where they'd made the incisions. My nipples were gone, replaced by flat skin that would later be tattooed to look realistic. I looked like a woman who'd been assembled from spare parts, but I was alive. And slowly, very slowly, I started to accept this new body. Not love it, not yet, but accept that this was who I was now. Olivia suggested I try yoga. She'd read somewhere that it helped cancer survivors reconnect with their bodies. I was skeptical. I could barely touch my toes before cancer, and now I had limited range of motion from the surgeries. But I went to a beginner class at a studio near our house. The instructor was a soft-spoken woman named Maya, who didn't ask questions when I told her I had physical limitations. She showed me modifications, reminded me to listen to my body, never pushed me beyond what felt safe. That first class, I could barely hold downward dog for 5 seconds. My chest pulled, my arms shook, but I did it. And for the first time in over a year, my body did something other than survive. It moved. It stretched. It existed for something beyond treatment. I started going twice a week, then 3 times. The poses got easier. My strength came back incrementally. More importantly, I started to feel inhabiting my body instead of just dragging it through each day. Around the same time, I joined a support group at Gilda's Club, a community center for cancer survivors. Every Wednesday evening, 8 women sat in a circle and talked about life after treatment. Hair growing back, fear of recurrence, relationships that ended or survived, the strange guilt of moving forward when others didn't make it. The group leader was a volunteer named Daniel. He was maybe 40, with kind eyes and a quiet presence. He didn't participate in the discussions, just facilitated, asked thoughtful questions, made sure everyone felt heard. At the end of each session, he stayed to help fold chairs and clean up. One evening, I stayed late too. We worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he asked how I was doing. Really doing, not the polite answer I gave most people. I told him the truth, that I was healing physically but felt lost emotionally, that I didn't know who I was anymore, not the career-focused woman I'd been before, not the sick person I'd been during treatment. Someone in between, still figuring out how to exist in this new body with this new life. Daniel nodded like he understood. Then he told me his story. His wife had died from ovarian cancer 3 years ago. They'd fought for 18 months, tried every treatment, stayed hopeful until the very end. She didn't make it. He'd been volunteering at Gilda's Club ever since, trying to make sense of his grief by helping others survive what she couldn't. He asked what I was planning to do next. With work, with life, with all the time I'd fought so hard to have. I admitted I didn't know. I'd been so focused on surviving that I hadn't thought about what came after. My old job felt meaningless now. Going back to marketing campaigns and product launches after staring down mortality seemed impossible. Daniel said something that stayed with me. You're not the same person who got diagnosed. Stop trying to fit back into a life that doesn't fit anymore. Build something new. We started talking after group meetings regularly. Coffee at a nearby cafe, walks around Green Lake when the weather was nice. He didn't treat me like a cancer patient. Didn't ask about my scans or side effects unless I brought them up. He saw me as a whole person, someone with thoughts and humor and interests beyond survival. With Daniel, I felt like Emily again. Not Emily the cancer survivor, or Emily the divorcee, or Emily the broken woman trying to piece herself together. Just Emily. A woman who loved coffee and bad puns and watching her daughter play soccer. A woman who was still learning who she might become. One afternoon, sitting on a bench overlooking the lake, Daniel mentioned that he'd started volunteering because he needed purpose after loss. Asked if I'd thought about doing something similar, using my experience to help others the way Rachel had helped me. The idea lodged itself in my mind and wouldn't leave. I'd spent a year being helped, supported, carried through treatment by doctors and nurses and volunteers, and my sister. Maybe it was time to give back, to turn my survival into something meaningful. I didn't have answers yet, but for the first time since my diagnosis, I had possibility. A future that wasn't just about staying alive, but about figuring out what kind of life I wanted to build. The 1-year follow-up appointment was scheduled for April 15th, 13 months after my diagnosis, 12 months since my mastectomy. Dr. Morrison had ordered the full workup, CT scans of my chest, abdomen, and pelvis. Blood work, including tumor markers. Physical exam. The same battery of tests that would determine if I was still cancer-free or if the nightmare was starting over. The week leading up to the scans was the worst I'd felt since finishing treatment. Every ache in my body became potential evidence of metastasis. A headache meant brain mets. Back pain meant it had spread to my bones. Fatigue meant it was in my liver. I knew I was being irrational. I'd had these same pains during treatment when they were just side effects. But knowing something intellectually didn't stop the fear from consuming me. The scans themselves were routine by now. I lay still in the CT machine while it hummed and clicked around me. Held my breath when instructed. Tried not to think about what the images might show. The technician was professional and gave nothing away, which meant either there was nothing to see or she wasn't allowed to tell me. The blood draw was quick. Watching the vials fill with dark red blood, I thought about tumor markers, proteins that cancer cells release. If mine were elevated, it meant cancer was growing somewhere even if the scans looked clear. Normal results didn't guarantee anything, but abnormal results guaranteed everything was about to fall apart again. Dr. Morrison scheduled the results appointment for 5 days later. 5 days of waiting. 5 days of watching my phone, checking the patient portal obsessively, analyzing every sensation in my body for signs of disease. Harper asked why I was so quiet. I told her I had a doctor's appointment coming up and I was a little nervous. She hugged me tight and said I was the bravest person she knew. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. Daniel called the night before my results appointment. Asked if I wanted company. I said no, then changed my mind. Olivia would come with me, but having Daniel there too, someone who understood medical trauma and loss, felt grounding. He met us in the waiting room, said nothing, just sat beside me and let me grip his hand until they called my name. Dr. Morrison's expression when we walked into her office told me nothing. She pulled up the scans on her computer screen, showing me cross-sections of my chest and abdomen. Pointed to where my tumor had been, just scar tissue now. Showed me my lymph nodes, normal size, no abnormalities. My liver, lungs, bones, all clear. Then she read the tumor marker results. CA 15-3 and CEA, the two markers they tracked for breast cancer. Both well within normal range, no elevation, no red flags. She looked at me and said the words I'd been desperate to hear. No evidence of disease. Official remission. 1 year cancer-free. I didn't cry. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, always pictured myself sobbing with relief. Instead, I just felt numb. Like my body had been braced for impact for so long that it didn't know how to relax, even when the danger passed. Olivia cried enough for both of us. Daniel squeezed my hand. Dr. Morrison smiled and said she'd see me again in 3 months for the next follow-up. Remission wasn't the same as cured. I'd be monitored closely for 5 years, and even after that, the risk of recurrence never fully disappeared. But today, right now, I was okay. We went out for lunch after the appointment. Olivia ordered champagne even though it was noon on a Tuesday. Harper came straight from school to join us, and we celebrated with pasta and sparkling water and the overwhelming relief of good news. But that night, alone in my room, I felt something unexpected. Not joy or gratitude, those would come later. What I felt was purpose. I'd survived. Against odds that had seemed impossible a year ago, I'd made it through chemotherapy, surgery, radiation, and reconstruction. I was still here, and that meant I had a responsibility to do something meaningful with the time I'd fought so hard to keep. The next morning, I called American Cancer Society. Asked about their Patient Navigator program, volunteers who guided newly diagnosed patients through treatment, answered questions, provided support from someone who'd been there. They told me they were looking for volunteers. Asked if I'd be interested in training. I said yes before I could second-guess myself. 2 weeks later, I submitted my resignation to the tech company I'd worked for before my diagnosis. They'd held my position as long as legally required, but I hadn't logged in once since starting chemotherapy. That career, the presentations, the product launches, the endless pursuit of metrics and growth, belonged to someone else. Not me. Not anymore. I started training as a patient navigator in May. Learned how to talk to newly diagnosed patients, how to share my story without overwhelming them, how to be honest about the difficulty without taking away hope. In June, they assigned me my first patient, a 42-year-old woman with stage 2 breast cancer, terrified and alone, sitting in the same waiting room where I'd sat a year earlier. I recognized the look in her eyes, the fear, the disbelief, the desperate need for someone to tell her she'd survive this. I sat down beside her and introduced myself, told her my name, that I'd been diagnosed 13 months ago, that I understood how scared she was, that it was going to be hard, harder than she could imagine, but that she could do it, that I'd be there to help. She started crying. I held her hand and let her cry. And in that moment, I understood why I'd survived. Not just for Harper or Olivia or myself, but for this. To be the person for someone else that Rachel had been for me. My life looked nothing like I'd planned, but maybe it was exactly what it was supposed to be.